it becomes an exciting meeting because you have, a cross-section of views from across all the partners. I want to also remind you we are using the hashtag Climate Resilience UG. Our hashtag is Climate Resilience UG. We're using that on Twitter and Facebook. And if you also have friends on Facebook, let them know we are streaming live. We have a Facebook Live platform on the ACODE page, which is active, and we want to request those of you who are online and want to see the dialogue live, you could actually open that on Facebook, look out for ACODE, and you should be able to follow live, but you could share the same stream with other partners across the world to be part of this conversation. So I want to welcome you to this second session. We'll try and manage our time within this session. We'll also have other stakeholders speak to us and also open up for a Q&A after Ronald Kagwa has spoken. The Q&A will be across both presentations, including Bob Natifu's presentation and Mr. Kagwa's presentation. So we are now looking at the assessment report of compliance for the 2021-22 budget to climate change interventions in the third National Development Plan, which is of course running from 2020-2021 to 2024-25. Mr. Ronald Kagwa will be sharing with us the findings and recommendations. And Mr. Ronald Kagwa is the manager, head production, trade and tourism planning department at the National Planning Authority. You're most welcome, Ronald. Please come and share with us the findings and recommendations of your assessment.
Thank you, Maurice. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I first of all wish to thank ACODE for this organization, which is now becoming an annual event. I also want to recognize the support from CARE, Uganda, that works with ACODE to sponsor this assessment. We do this assessment in partnership with the Ministry of Water and Environment. So what I'm presenting here is what we assessed, the three institutions, NPA, the Ministry of Water and Environment, and ACODE. So, this is the compliance assessment of the financial year 21-22 national budget to climate change interventions in NDP III. Next slide. Now the presentation looks at those areas. We want to understand the context and rationale for compliance assessment. What methodology did we use? What data did we use? What assessment tools did we use? What are the key findings of this assessment? What are the key findings of this assessment? What are the results of this assessment? What are the key messages, takeaways from this budget assessment? What are emerging issues for policy attention and lobbying and advocacy? And then the recommendations. Next slide. Now, in understanding the context and rationale for this assessment, we want to recognize that NDP III climate change is one of our key development challenges. It's not only an environmental issue, but it's a development challenge, which has consequences on our food security. 40% of our people are not food secure. And if you trace this insecurity, it has dimensions of climate change. It affects energy security. Uganda's energy is vulnerable to climate change. Even the renewable energy we're talking of is vulnerable to climate change. It affects our cultural productivity, our livelihoods, and income poverty are affected by climate change. Vulnerability to poverty is very high. Even those of you that have graduated from poverty, you can easily go back to poverty because of climate change. So NDP III recognizes the vulnerability and the challenges of these to our development. And this is supposed to cascade down to the national budget. So we plan from the development frameworks and then reflect whatever we've planned into the national budgets. That's what it's supposed to be. So this assessment tries to see, is what you have in your planning frameworks also reflected in your budgets? Have you allocated resources to those interventions that you put forward in your planning frameworks? That's the spirit of this assessment. Next slide. Now, this assessment is anchored on Section 13(7) of the Public Finance Management Act of 2015, which mandates the National Planning Authority to issue a certificate of compliance of the national budget to the National Development Plan. We are mandated as the National Planning Authority to see that the budget is aligned to the National Development Plan, to ensure that the budget implements what the plan put in place. This is why it is a requirement that each government agency, whoever receives public funds, should have a plan. And that plan should talk to NDP III, should be aligned to NDP III, such that whatever money that we spend is within our planning horizon, such that we do achieve what we planned. And to ascertain that, we issue a certificate of compliance. Before the budget goes to Parliament for approval, there should be a certificate of compliance. And each of the MDAs are also, assessed to see to what extent they have aligned their budgets to the National Development Plan. We want also to note that while climate change integration in planning is gaining grounds, that is the positive note. The integration of climate change in the planning processes is gaining grounds. The bad news is that it is not sufficient to generate the transformative adaptation and mitigation results that we want. We've done the planning. Climate change is in the plan. If you read NDP III, climate change is there. In all the programs, all the PIAPs, the local government development plans, but it's not sufficient to generate the transformative adaptation and mitigation results envisaged under the National Determined Contribution and the National Climate Change Policy. Our National Climate Change Policy and the National Determined Contribution is very ambitious, and the budget should match that ambition, such that whatever that we plan matches the ambition of these two important documents that guide our activities on climate change. Therefore, it's critical, that integration in planning must be accompanied by an equally robust financial resource allocation in national budgets. Do the resource allocation in the national budget as ambitious as the NDC commitments? Are they as ambitious as the national climate change policy? This is what we want to see, and this is the only way to ensure effective implementation, such that those challenges, development challenges posed by climate change, of poverty, income poverty, of unemployment, mitigated or, avoided. Next slide. What are the objectives of this? And again, the objectives of this compliance assessment. Now, the major objective of this assessment is to ascertain whether the budgeting instruments fully align with NDP III, annualized financial resource and targets for climate change intervention in the selected 8 programs. This assessment covers 8 programs. What we want to see is that by budgeting instruments, I mean the annual budgets, the budgetary framework papers, the ministerial policy statements. Those are the budgeting instruments. Are they in alignment with NDP III annualized financial resources? NDP III has got financial resources which are projected at each level. So do these instruments, the budgetary framework paper of each of the programs, the ministerial policy statements of each of the programs, the annual budget of each of the programs, is it in tandem with the financial resources that are put in NDP III in those programs? Therefore, one of the objectives is to ascertain the extent of alignment of national budgetary frameworks to NDP III, prioritized climate change interventions. Like I mentioned, NDP III already has prioritized climate change interventions. They are there in that document. But the question is the national budgeting also prioritizing those? Is there an alignment of the national budgeting frameworks to NDP III prioritized climate change interventions? That's one of the key objectives of this assessment. Another objective is to identify emerging issues, key messages, recommendations, and areas of non-compliancy. So in each of these programs, we identified emerging issues, key messages, recommendations, and areas of non-compliancy. And then lastly, the objective of this is to generate evidence-based data to inform advocacy, to inform lobbying. The idea is to build effective national climate change responsive budgeting systems. Is our budgeting system climate change responsive? And as civil society, how do we lobby for building a robust, responsive budgeting system? So those are the 3 objectives that guided our assessment. Now let's look at the methodology that we used. Like I mentioned, we have 20 programs. But out of the 20, we identified 8 for the assessment on the basis of prioritization in our nationally determined contribution. This is a global program that we committed ourselves to in the Paris Agreement, where we said these are the key sectors that we are going to look at in order to reduce our emissions. Yes? So, the other priority that we looked at is the national climate change policy. What sectors does the national climate change policy, stress or emphasize? And then we also based on the Uganda Green Growth Development Strategy. We have got a green growth development strategy, which also stresses the few sectors that are change agents that are leading us to that is supposed to transition us to a green economy by 2030. So that is what guided our selection of the 8 programs. 3 frameworks, NDC, the policy, and the Uganda Green Growth Development Strategy. Please, I implore you to read these documents. Another key factor that we looked at is also, is the sector or program vulnerable to climate change? Honorable, you're welcome. Vulnerability to climate change of the sector. But the program could also be, much as it is vulnerable, it could also be a cause of climate change through greenhouse gas emissions. I'll tell you that energy is vulnerable to climate change. Whenever we have drought, water levels go down, affecting our capacity to generate electricity. So hydroelectric power is vulnerable to climate change. When you have floods, again they disturb the system. You recall one moving island which distorted our generation of power. You remember? Or you may not. But that was a result of the floods. So our capacity to generate power, biomass, solar, all these are climate sensitive energy sources. But again, at the same time, the use of fossil fuel in our energy is also a cause of climate change. It emits greenhouse gas emissions. So therefore, that was another priority for the choice of the 8 programs. Now against that background, the programs include agro-industrialization. This is the flagship program of NDP III, which is supposed to be the game changer, agro-industrialization. Sustainable tourism development was chosen also. The natural resource environment, climate change, land and water management. This is the program where Bob Natif, comes from, and another Bob also, they come from this. So, private sector development is another one. Manufacturing, integrated transport infrastructure and services. This transport infrastructure, our roads are washed away by rains. There is also dust on our roads. So there is vulnerability of our roads, our infrastructure, to climate change. Sustainable energy development, sustainable urbanization and housing. New cities today do not have the capacity to mitigate or to adapt or to build resilience to climate change. So our new cities, including Kampala, are very vulnerable to climate change. And then human capital development. So those are the 8 programs that we identified for assessment. Yes, this assessment was basically based on 2 responses to climate change. NDP III identifies interventions that come from adaptation. What adaptation interventions are in NDP III? If you look at energy, what adaptation interventions are there? If you look at sustainable transport, what adaptation interventions are there? Agriculture, what interventions are adaptation, and what are the budget allocation to those adaptation interventions? That is how we looked at adaptation and resilience building to climate change. Now, the other part was mitigation. NDP III again has got interventions that mitigate climate change. For example, we look at mass transportation, where we want to have buses in Kampala instead of the borders. Mass transportation reduces emissions. Some of us will not come with our cars to Kampala if the train system was effective. You just park at the train station, get in the train, and then come to Kampala to work. Or the bicycle, if the roads were wide enough and the bicycle lanes, many of you would be riding bicycles to come for work. So, and that is mitigation, please. Does the Ministry of Works has a budget allocation to those interventions? That's mitigation. So that was our criteria for the assessment. Adaptation interventions, budget allocation of these interventions, mitigation interventions, budget allocation to these interventions. And I want you to note that NDP III targets reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 1.39 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2020 to 1 metric ton of carbon CO2 equivalent by 24-25. That's our target from a planning perspective, to reduce the CO2 emissions through those interventions that should be reflected in your programs as well as budget allocations. Like I mentioned, the source documents for our data was the NDP III results framework. Again, I want you to read that framework. It's even on the website of NPA, to see what is ambition as a country, what are the indicators, what are the targets. The relevant program implementation action plans. Each of the program has got a detailed implementation action plan, which gives the results, the expected interventions, the objectives reflected in these PRs. Also, many institutions have got cooperative reports. We looked at all this, and we also reviewed the strategic plans. Those were our data source documents. So those are the planning documents first. But we also had the budget documents, the budget framework papers for each of the program, ministerial policy statements for each of the programs, and the quarterly progress reports that these institutions make to the Ministry of Finance. We assess them. And then, as NPA, we have developed a tool that we use to make assessment. It's a very elaborate tool, which, again, I want to implore you to interact with us and see what this tool is and how it works. But what we did was to customize it to climate change. Now, the tool has got some of those columns, as you can see. We look at a climate change variable. Is it adaptation? Is it mitigation? What are the objectives? We look at the program objective, all these different programs. What is the relevant program objective? That talks to that variable. What are the strategic interventions proposed in NDP III for that? What are the output indicators? If that is now the planning aspect. Now we go to the BFP. Is the BFP, the budget framework paper of a program, prioritizing it? Is it a priority in the BFP program? Yes or no? And we had weighted scores. And then look at the NDP III target. NDP III target and the BFP target. We compare the two targets. Which is more ambitious? Is the BFP target as ambitious as NDP III, or is it more ambitious than NDP III? You may allocate resources, but your target is too low to make us achieve the mitigation, the adaptation that we envisage after years. So therefore, what we did was compare levels of ambition of the BFP and the NDP III. We identify the percentage deviation. What's the deviation between the two documents, the NDP III and then the BFP? And then out of that, we got a score and made comments. So that is the tool that we used. Please, this tool of data assessment, there are not so many in the world. There are not so many. Not so many countries do this. So we are one of the few countries, I may pause, that do this kind of assessment, at that level. So now from that assessment, we go to those results. And compared 2020, 21 to 21, 22. Those are the scores that we give. And please, if you score 80% to 100%, that is called satisfactory. That is satisfactory. 80 to 100%. And as far as we are concerned, nobody is satisfactory. If score 60 to 70%, that is moderately satisfactory. If score less than 60%, you are unsatisfactory. That is, we assessed and gave marks. We did it in 2020, 21. The average was 35%. I don't want to put some marks of some programs here in 2021 because they're embarrassingly low. They're embarrassingly low. I don't put them there. But the average was 35%. That is miserably unsatisfactory. And then you see some level of improvement. This new budget, I mean the 2021, is the first budget to implement the programs in their fullness. The other programs, in 2021, we are just introducing the program approach. So there was, sectors were not very much, programs were not very much used to this program approach. This is why the marks are low. But there is an improvement with an average score of 4%. And of course, you can see who is high and who is low. And we've got, again, explanation why for each of these scores. We have. My presentation will not go to those details, but again, I want to let you know that we have a document which will be put on our website. It's on our website, NPA, but we shall also give it to, I'm sure ACODE may have it, website as well. So that was the score. Let's look at the key messages that get out of this. Overall, I want to say that the alignment for financial year 21-22 annual budget to climate change interventions is moderately satisfactory at 64.7%. This represents an improvement from financial year 2021, where the annual budget was unsatisfactory at 35%. Another key message that we want to get out of here is that World Climate Change NDP III climate change interventions feature in budgets. The allocations of these interventions are so low, they're too meager and inadequate to generate the desired transformative change. So, can we scale up? The message is that we need to scale up, otherwise it is too low to cause the change. In other words, they should match the ambition of NDP III. In some cases, there is no budget line tied to climate change interventions. NDP III mentions the need to disseminate early warning information at all levels. But I want to say, if you look at the budget of the country, it is 0.0 billion, which is allocated to early warning. As awareness creation. So you find in a budget framework paper that we created awareness. Those are the miserable, interventions that are there, which cannot make any change that we want. So this calls for a higher understanding of what a climate change intervention is. I've told you that if we have buses instead of borders, that's climate change intervention. The train is climate change intervention because it reduces emissions. Irrigation is climate change intervention. But we limit ourselves to these small ones, awareness creation and growing trees. So we need to broaden our understanding of this. Next slide. I want again to remind you that the commitment that we have as a country is that our budget, we committed ourselves to give 1.6% of our GDP to climate change responsive interventions. That is our commitment in NDC, that we should give 1.6% of our GDP to climate change interventions. I want to tell you that this commitment is yet to be realized. We have not given 1.6% to this budget, these interventions on climate change. I've mentioned the deviation. We have new cities today. Apart from Kampala, there is no new city which has got a climate change action plan. I know that ACODE supports the new cities. I think ACODE needs to come in to support the new cities to get action plans, climate change action plans, and the early warning systems. In agriculture, which is our key sector, key driver of the economy, Agriculture Ministry, do we have anybody from agriculture here? This ministry is more inclined towards crop resources. The animal husbandry is an orphan in terms of resource allocation, in terms of prioritization. And yet there are also climate-related issues with animal husbandry, like methane, emission of methane by the animals. So there is an inclination towards crops and little attention being paid to the animal side of the ministry. Again, when you look at the agricultural value chain looks at production levels, the lower levels of the agricultural value chain. In processing, the agricultural program does not look at mitigation of climate change. Marketing, again, there are issues here, climate change issues. Again, the program does not allocate resources too. So we need to look at the whole value chain and see where and allocate, resources to each of the value chain. Again, I'm saying that agriculture looks at production, ignores the high levels of the value chain. I also want to let you know that there is multiplication of vulnerabilities. Climate change vulnerability is there, but we also have COVID-19 vulnerability. And the bad news is that we are diverting attention to COVID-19 and ignoring the problem of climate change. And this, Uganda, not only Uganda is guilty, but also the developed countries are guilty of this. And when climate change is now talking to tell the world that climate change is still around, this is why over 300 people died in Germany. The Hurricane Ida that was mentioned by Arthur has also hit the US to tell the world that COVID-19 is there, but climate change is also still a problem. So I think Uganda, as we move, we need to also know that climate change has these issues. I've mentioned that there are two mega resources to climate change. Another key concern is sequencing. Sequencing is a key aspect of planning. What comes first? What comes last? There should be a logical sequence of interventions to see that they are interlinked and reinforce each other. But I want to say that the budget reform papers do not show this sequencing. They prefer to defer climate change interventions to the forthcoming years. We shall do that one in the last year. We shall do that one in the next year, Yet climate change requires short-term, medium-term, and long-term interventions. So that's another key factor that we looked at. So, energy is one of the sectors that take the biggest percentage of our budget. But where does the budget go? It goes to generation, construction of Karuma Dam, construction of other mini dams, And very little goes, I mean, a lot also goes to transmission, and of course minerals development, oil and gas. But there are high impact areas which affect livelihoods, like LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. If every household had gas, this is a lower expenditure, but with multiplier effects on livelihoods. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Energy looks at these high-level interventions of generation, of transmission, and ignores biomass energy, ignores energy efficiency. Yet these are low cost, but with higher multiplier effects on livelihoods and household incomes. Again, we penalize this in terms of our score. We identified it and also used the score as a result of that. Now, what are our recommendations? There is an intervention by the Ministry of Finance called budget tagging, whereby there are codes, budget codes, which show climate change interventions. Yes, the budget, in the way the budget is, it has codes, but we need climate change, tagging to see that, of course, my colleague here knows it better. Maybe he can say something about it later on. But we need to code the budget, climate change tagging of the budget, in order to trace expenditures. Because if you know those codes, you can easily, sum up and say this budget has allocated this amount of resources to climate change. So what we are saying is that fast track climate change tagging, budget tagging, such that we can use it to lobby for climate finance, locally and of course from our development partners. Climate change should feature in all programs. I think as it is incumbent upon us all here to see that climate change features as one of the key cross-cutting issues that should be prioritized in government programs and budgeting documents. And we need to raise awareness of what climate change is beyond planting trees, because that's what our people, and awareness creation. We need tangible interventions that make a change, to climate change. We need to integrate climate change interventions in the post-COVID-19 economic stimulus package. I've been looking at the stimulus package. Unfortunately, it does not talk about climate change. We've missed it. It doesn't talk about climate change. I don't know whether the minister of the relevant minister is part of the task force. He's not. I think we have got it wrong here. We need to see that our economic stimulus package should have interventions on climate change. We're also saying that we need to balance the budget allocation between energy generation, transmission, mineral development, especially oil and gas, with other critical climate change interventions, such as energy efficiency, biomass energy, yes, and LPG, which are mentioned in NDP III, but they are not prioritized in the budgets. And our budget goes to generation, transmission, and oil and gas development. So I want to thank you very much for listening. Moderator, I hand over to you. Thank you.
We need to give Ronald another round of applause for a great conversation. We have another microphone, so I will try and make it as mobile as possible. But before we do that, because we are going to go into plenary conversation, but there is still a lot of stakeholders in this meeting that I would want to pick upon to speak to us, especially reflecting on the information that has been provided for us. I mean, if you define this, you would probably say grim. In my view, it's a very grim assessment, especially in terms of the budgeting towards the interventions to climate change. But I'll come to that. I wanted first to recognize Ms. Mwanga Susan Nasuna from the Ministry of Gender. Can you stand for recognition? I just needed to know where you are. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Because we are talking to the issues of gender vulnerabilities, especially from the presentation by Natifu. All right, Dr. Kalist, I want to begin with you. You fall in the right space, so I'll sanitize this microphone. Perfect, so you can help. So, Dr. Kalist, I want to begin with you. Quick reflections on the assessment, and then I'll come to the various other representatives of the various ministries. Yes. Touchdown, we just need to make sure. Yes.
Thank you very much, moderator. I would like to thank Ronald for a very, very interesting presentation. I think if you look at the information provided, I think it's going to be very, very key in enabling us to plan better, allocate resources better. One of the things, for example, I picked, Ronald, is, and maybe you may need to clarify, while all the other programs were showing a higher score, increase in score, the program where climate change itself is actually showing a reduction. So if we are having a program where climate change is housed but is showing a reduction, what message are we giving to the other programs? Maybe you may need to clarify on that. What does that mean? Now, there's something which you highlighted, and to me I think is a very, very big issue, is what constitutes climate change intervention? How many people actually know? Even when you are costing, when you are evaluating this, maybe you may need to clarify, how did you cost? How is the climate change intervention different from the normal intervention? There are some interventions which we call no-regret interventions. They are needed only whether there is climate change or not, but they will also help us to deal with climate change, either in adaptation or mitigation. So something I think needs to be done, because indeed people talk about tree planting, talk about climate change, people have planted trees. We have even been struggling with the issue of environment. People, when we hear about environment protection, say plant trees, restore wetlands, but is the environment about trees and wetlands only? So I think when it comes to climate change, we really need to raise awareness, as you have highlighted, Ronald, so that people can know, and I think starting from this room, if each one of us was put in a corner and just highlight what actually constitutes climate change interventions, maybe our responses would be as varied, as many as we are here. So what about the ordinary person, and how can we help them? I think some work that needs to be done in that regard. Now, Ronald, there is something we talked about, that the government committed to allocate 1.6% of GDP to climate change. I don't know whether this assessment has been able to determine where are we now, so that we can talk. If it is about 1.6%, are we anywhere close? And I think this information will be very key. Crude as it may be, I think it would be important to help us moving forward. The issue of budget tagging was very important, but the moment you don't clarify what constitutes a climate intervention, then budget tagging becomes a problem. At the end of the day, you are moving all the money to one code. So probably as we think about the issue of budget tagging, let's reflect what constitutes a climate change intervention. And I think once we move in this direction, then we'll provide guidance. Otherwise, I want to thank you for this assessment, very, very interesting, and I think it can help us to able more. Right now, that we have now a climate change law. Within the ministry right now, we are trying to operationalize it, to put in place an appropriate structure at the national level with the coordination mechanisms, and also at the local government level. And that's where this guidance is going to be key, so that people can be guided better. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Kalist. And please hold the mic. I will be sharing where you go next. I had forgotten to recognize the presence of the woman member of parliament for Chivoga District, the Honorable Christine Kaya Nachimwero. Thank you so much for joining us. She's a member of the Parliamentary Climate Change Committee, so we want to thank you so much, Honorable, for joining us. Okay. We had a representative from the Ministry of Finance. I would have to go back. Anyone from Finance who would want to speak to the assessment? Okay. I'll come to Susan, since you're coming from the Ministry of Gender, and we are speaking to issues of budgeting, especially promoting gender-inclusive climate change strategies. Your quick reactions to the assessment, based on what the ministry actually is doing to address some of these vulnerabilities that shared earlier by Natifu. Yes?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think this is a very good assessment. What we need to have is to have it, with the information there disseminated, okay, to the general public, but first and foremost to the planners or policy analysts in the ministries and the district planners in the local governments, because these are the people that put together our budgets and budget framework papers and such documents. In ours, we have one page for cross-cutting issues, where we have something for environment, gender, and HIV. But unpacking the concept of climate change, I think is very, very key to these people and later on to the general public, because actually, here they just mentioned environment, and some people don't differentiate between environment and climate change, all those smaller packages and concepts. There could be some other categories that I would like to suggest. I don't know in all these studies where UBOS can be utilized. We have also statistical units in our ministries, and then, because I may not have chance to have this mic again, I think the other categories in the general populace in terms of awareness creation, the media, and also broken down into smaller groups within that, including the musicians. Then for us as a ministry, we've benefited from some of these very challenging issues as far as sensitization and awareness creation is concerned. The religious leaders and cultural leaders have been very useful to us. Thank you.
Okay, so now the floor is open. Ronald, I hope you're taking note, because you'll have to react to some of these suggestions. Quick reactions to the assessment. Yes, we can begin there. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Adidas Namanya, representing Ministry of Health. And we welcome the assessment. It is very detailed and captures key issues that we can touch on in order to plan and budget for climate change in the sectors. My question was, in the presentation, you indicated that we have human development capital, and that captures many sectors, I guess, health inclusive. So I'd like to know which sectors were assessed, because this is a broad area, so that in the health sector we can know where we stand and what we can do. But what I can mention is that the health sector is one of the most impacted sectors by climate change. The flooding, you talk of drought, you talk of landslides, displacement of population, the multiplication of diseases like malaria, cholera, and others. But we have a big challenge. In the health sector, we have many priorities, disease-related and infrastructure-related. So the issue of climate change may not feature as a key priority. And this is where we need NPA, Ministry of Finance, to help us target change in the health sector. although we recognize that it impacts on us, but the priorities are so high. Currently, COVID-19 is the big thing, and every effort is being put into that. The nexus between climate change and, of course, COVID-19 is very well recognized, and it has been mentioned by different people here. How do we integrate planning for COVID-19 and climate change? That's the key thing this August House can discuss, and we come up with a recommendation which can be passed on to the sector top management. I think for now that's what I can say, but I'm happy that health can participate in this conversation, and we can come up with clear strategies on how to plan and have money in the budgets that can help intervene in climate change issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didas. Yes, Ronald, I hope that is also captured. There's a gentleman in red next to you there, and then we'll go to the back. Yes, I have seen the gentleman there.
I am Emma Okror. I work for Uganda Red Cross Society as a disaster preparedness officer. I want to make comments into two sections that Ronald highlighted. One is on early warning systems. In fact, this reminds me of my chat always with the Mujuni, who is going to be the next speaker from the National Meteorological Authority, when he complains to me that, Emma, we do not have direct finance to strengthen the aspect of early warning systems, despite the fact that we know that early warning systems help us in terms of preparedness, mitigation, and response. We want to implore Ronald and the team that kindly, in order for us to prepare our communities, in order for us to prepare our country towards these disasters that are befalling us, kindly take into consideration funding the aspect of early warning systems. Secondly, I want to thank God that Kaya Christine is a member of parliament currently. Kaya was so much in support during the development of the climate change law and bill. In fact, in most cases, when we wanted to have an interaction with the parliament, we would pass through Kaya. Kaya, you're now in, Honorable Kaya, you're now in parliament. The climate change bill has been part of you from the inception of the bill. And now you realize what you supported to develop has no finances attached to it. In the House, we have other members of parliament. Please, Honorable Kaya, I see again they have made you sit in the Committee of Climate Change. That means they want you to ensure that you nurture and grow the climate change law. Kindly support us to ensure that we realize finance to be in position to implement the climate change law. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. And I see you introduced the next speaker, Mujuni. So, is there with his hand?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Emma, for introducing me before even I come on the floor. But once again, I'm called Godfrey Mujuni. I work with Uganda National Meteorological Authority, the institution mandated to monitor weather and climate across the country. I would like to thank the speakers, of course, Ronald and Bob, the Commissioner, for giving insightful presentations about issues concerning weather, climate, and climate change. I must state that issues of weather, climate, and climate change are cross-cutting in nature. And Ronald really talked about them very well, because when you talk about weather, it almost impacts on each and every sector. It can as well be agriculture. Didas has talked about health. There are studies actually going on, probably to see whether COVID-19 could be related with weather. Because so far we've seen during winter, that's when COVID cases are always high. But of course, when we look at this, what can we do, especially concerning this kind of information called early warning information? Very important for taking decisions not only at national level, but even at the household level. What can a farmer do? Because one of the ways of adapting to a changing climate is by using climate information, because it can guide you what are you likely to do. So therefore, if you can understand that, it would be very important. Maybe to add on what Dr. Karist said, what constitutes climate change? I think, when Ronald Kagwa, it is important to start knowing the science of climate change, then you'll be able to understand what climate change is all about. Therefore, you start with the science. If there is an increment, say, of 2 degrees Celsius, then you're able to say there is some climate change, because there should be some parameters. And therefore, issues of weather and climate are not well thought about. And yet, they are very important in a country like Uganda that is rain independent. If the weather is good, you expect everything to be good. If the weather is bad, you know what you expect. And therefore, we should take advantage and see how best we can improve on issues of weather, climate, and also climate change. Because when you look at, say, at global level, there are 2 important institutions: Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and also United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. IPCC does the science, and then UNFCCC does the coordination and so on. And therefore, it is important to look at it from that wider scale. And what I can say is that it would be important, probably, if we try to look at it from each sector, so that there are some resources that can support this kind of intervention. Bob, of course, talked about issues of weather and climate information. We are trying our level best to disseminate this information. I can see Morris Mugisha is here, especially UBC. Thanks for supporting us on a daily basis. We normally issue these forecasts. But of course, there are some other platforms we use, like social media, and of course we use mass media on radios and so on to make sure that we pass on this kind of information. And of course, this time we've tried to translate the information from English into local languages. Because, you know, our literacy rates here in Uganda, people who can read and comprehend English very well are very few. Therefore, if we can translate this information into local languages, it could be very important for utilization. And I want to say that probably the way you talked about logical sequencing, it would be very important, which comes first. Because if you look at the country, when there is a drought, they even channel resources from one sector to make sure that they feed the nation. And therefore, if we can understand this early warning information, it would be very important. I'm equally happy that Christine Kaya is also part of Climate Change Committee. And of course, Mr. Honorable Songa, he has been part of climate change. And therefore, we feel probably our issues could reach the National House. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mujuni, for your submission. And since you are speaking of the honorables, I wanted to recognize the Honorable Katabazi Francis, who is the Member of Parliament for Kalungu East in Kalungu District. You're most welcome for joining us this morning. Yes, we have, I saw a hand there. Ronald, I had wanted to come to you. to quickly react to these because I don't want them to be so many and we lose track of time. So yes, introduce yourself and your question or comment. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I will just be very brief. I'm Dr. Kabanji. I work with the Ministry of Health, Commissioner of Environmental Health Department. I just have two comments. One, I want to thank Leonard. I think I'm using that's the right name, for the presentation. For us who have been at the forefront of implementation of climate change interventions, have actually found a lot of difficulties in the area of financing. I have personally participated in a lot of environmental impact activities, actually unfunded. And of late, we've been having a debate whether as a ministry we should continue engaging in some of these activities, especially if there is no financing. But I want to look at two things. One, yes, we are talking about compliance of budgets, but what is the appreciation for climate issues from the governance structures? How do leaders, and it's good we have members of parliament here, but how do leaders appreciate? How do they look at climate? Because maybe an MP in Bulvujo may look at this as a very serious issue, but maybe a gentleman from Budaka who may not bother at all since he's not seeing the effect. So what have we done? What is the level of appreciation from our leaders? Then at the national level, what is the level of commitment? Especially, I would have been happy if I heard from someone from finance, the level of allocation of resources to this. You were talking of compliance, but for example, in local governments, how much do you want them to allocate? And how much have you given them? Because to me it seems the indicative planning figures have remained the same over years. And every time we bring in a cross-cutting issue. So what happens if you're telling them to put in the climate issues when in actual sense they have not been able to handle the other issues of nutrition, gender, and the rest? So then the issue of coordination at the center here. There's a lot of haphazard coordination in efforts related to climate. You'll find yourself in Kasese, probably with maybe the office of the Prime Minister, and then the other day you find yourself in Kayunga, probably with the Ministry of Water, and there is no clear. You write reports, we have really, really good recommendations that have been made, and you don't have where to actually communicate them. Thank you very much,
Thank you, Dr.
Kabanji.
Kabanji, yes. Dr. Kabanji, I'll take this. Okay, I see there's two gentlemen. Three. Ronald, I hope you're taking note. I don't want us to lose traction of this conversation. It's an interesting conversation you're having, but as you prepare, sir, to introduce yourself, okay, Onesimus, I think it would be good, whether yourself, to speak to the issues Ronald raised on how much you're doing with the local governments on the issues of sensitization. Even as you do the scorecard, the local government scorecard, how much work are you doing with the local governments and the councillors on the issues to do with climate change? So Onesimus, I'll come to you before I come back to Ronald. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Bob Katsungu. Sometimes when you hear Bob and Bob from Ministry of Water and Environment, sometimes when they talk about Bob Natif, if they don't say Natif, they imagine you're talking about me. I'm from the Ministry of Water and Environment, Forestry to be specific. Thank you so much, Ronald. I think this conversation that you've brought up, compliance assessment, is very good. I just wanted to find out whether, as a country, we are obligated to, under the enhanced transparency framework of UNFCCC, to also report about the other financing that is coming in from the external, bilateral, and the others. I know charity begins at home. So if you're doing an assessment, it's good to, to start with our budget. But there is quite a bit of financing that is also coming in from, the development partners. We had EU here, we have other partners here. And I know somebody could try to challenge us that, what about that other financing? Can we say something?
to compare, because we might, we might probably have a better analysis if we made a comparison. So I would request that if you have any figures available, I'm sure that you might have started to compare that. You can just say something about that, because that would help us as well.
Thank you, the other
Thank you very
board.
much. But also maybe lastly, when you said that tree growing is a small thing, I think it isn't. It's quite a huge, the low-hanging fruits, I mean, if the buses are not coming quickly, let's have these trees to do their mitigation. And you know how forestry makes a significant contribution to reduction of emissions from the atmosphere. So I think that statement needs to be, thank you very much.
The statement needs to be measured. You were careful in requesting for retraction, but thank you, the other board.
Going into climate finance. So we really need to bring the private sector on board, bring private capital, and also look at innovative financing instruments that will really help to leverage the scarce public resources which we are all talking about. So this is something I believe will be able to engage you moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, UNDP. Yes, there's a gentleman here, and then finally there's a gentleman on this side.
Thank you, Ronald, for that presentation. Before Ms. Julius is my name.
from National Environment Management Authority. And the findings actually that Ronald, through the assessment, especially in terms of the plans, the climate action plans and early warning systems in the different local governments, which they have been able to assess, concur with actually what some of my findings. I coordinated the National State of Environment report on behalf of government. And this reporting period, you are focusing on the new cities achieving sustainable urbanization, where we are assessing the ecological footprint of these new cities, the issues and challenges that are shaping urbanization within those different categories of cities, and looking at the economic potential. So the findings actually, in terms of the emerging issues, are quite similar, basing on my preliminary findings that I've been able to assess. And therefore the challenge is now how our local government prepared and shaped in terms of achieving sustainable urbanization. And you realize that most of these sectors within the local governments, like physical planning and of the like, they really need to develop well-designed plans, policies that are really providing for development with low environmental harm and therefore better human well-being and environment as well. So the question is, how is NPA, all the different arms of government, ready to support both technically and backstopping these local governments to ensure that really their development, their policies, plans, guidelines actually integrating these issues of climate-related change, such that really at the end of the day, they are able to achieve green urbanization and then achieving sustainable urbanization. And again, it goes back to the ministry, how with the establishment of the Act now, how are they prepared, how are they planning to really reinforce and backstop these local governments to ensure that those are achieved. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Julius. So there is the gentleman there. I'll come to you, sir, don't you worry. The gentleman there, and then we'll have a lady here, then, oh, okay. Ronald, you'll have a book, an entire book to reply to. Okay.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Boaz Musimenta from the Office of the Prime Minister, and we are charged with the coordination of the implementation of the plan, NDP III. But even then, I'm placed in an institution that a department that is responsible for coordinating the program implementation, and I'm a focal person for the program on climate change. Mr. Kagwa, thank you very much. You have always done your thorough analysis, no doubt about that. But now we have to look at this issue of financing, whereas Mr. Kagwa concentrated on the size of the available resource, but most of the assessment was relied so much on the application of the little that is available. So what determines the correct application to interventions of adaptation and mitigation? Do those responsible for planning, and I want to correct this. You see, there is a myth that planning in ministries, departments, and agencies is done by those who carry the tag planners. They are those heads of departments who have functional vote functions that actually determine. A commissioner in a department will determine where to put the money, not the planner. So what is affecting the application to the exact interventions that Mr. Kagwa would be comfortable with as adaptation interventions or mitigation interventions? Is the engineer whom I know in the Ministry of Energy aware of, for example, what you are raising? And how is that in terms of planning synchronized to public policy in terms of focus? How are we going to touch the right buttons, to press the right buttons for us to achieve what we want, even when we have the meager resources? Because the 1.6% of the budget going to climate change, we shall sing about it the way we are talking about the Marabo Declaration on agriculture. and something else in health. So how do we apply the little resource that is available to the right areas and priorities, and how do we get those who actually do the planning? Because you know how money comes to government department. Finance comes when it has already said this Department of Climate Change is allocated so much in the PBS. So how do we make sure that it is applied to the right interventions? And how are those interventions? Should we look at the PIAPs, for example, speaking to the NDP III? Should we wait for the certificate of compliance for the budget when we have not actually quality assured the PIAP in the first place? Because you know what is happening around PIAPs, Mr. Kagwa. No program is aware whether the PIAP is approved or not, and so on, whether they are assessed, whether they are complying with. So if we get it wrong from the initial stages of the PIAP's development and approve, and how checking whether they are in sync with the NDP III, then we can only talk later that we have not achieved the levels we want in terms of moderate satisfaction and so on. Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity.
You know, when OPM is speaking, we give you all the time. You coordinate all these activities. So I must be careful not to limit the amount of time I give you as the project implementers, or actually the people that supervise the project implementation. Yes, there's a lady here and the other two, as I wind up here and go to Onesimus, then come back to Ronald. I also want to open this. I know that the Honorable Christine will speak at some point. Honorable Francis, let me know whenever. I'm happy to do that before even the Honorable Christine closes later today. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm called Juliet Atino from Ministry of Works and Transport. I'd like to thank so much Dr. Kagwa about your presentation. From the results of the assessment, you said that the ITIS, the Integrated Transport Infrastructure Services, where Ministry of Works and Transport scored the highest. From 2020-21, we scored 41%, but 2021-2022, we scored 75%. I don't know if I looked at it well, but it seems like ITIS was the highest scorer. And indeed, I would like to agree with this result of the assessment, because if you look at the programs we have, one of the strategic interventions we have under ITIS is the construction of infrastructure, a climate-proof infrastructure. And I would like to agree that as Ministry of Works and Transport, we have so many programs that address mitigations and adaptations, climate change options. So as Ministry of Works and Transport, I think this is very good for us. But also that is just for the beginning. I've had a colleague saying mass transport and other interventions are not coming. But I think going forward, we are all aware of the interventions that is coming under ITIS. For instance, we have development of inland ports like Bukasa, which aims at reducing the road, the cargo, lots of lorries that go through the road. We want to, in the midterm, use the water transport, which would reduce emissions so much. We also have the non-motorized transport systems in place. We have a policy, and recently we finalized the manual, and we all know that KCCA piloted some non-motorized transport, and this is also one of the climate change adaptation options. We have the mass transport programs also. As we talk, we have the bus rapid transit, which the process of bringing it on board is ongoing. So I think even when we are scoring highly now, we have still other opportunities to even do better. And then Dr. Kagwa also mentioned as one of the challenges that among the cross-cutting issues, we're only talking about gender, HIV, AIDS, and environment. But I think even though we are worried about other 10 or how many intervention or cross-cutting issues which we are not talking about, we should also appreciate where we have come from, where we are now able to talk about gender, HIV, AIDS, and environment. I think we only need more sensitizations. I think people are just not aware about it. It's a challenge, all right. but I think we can still sensitize people and it can be captured. And then one of the challenges, you also said that we don't have standalone, if I got it well, standalone budgets or interventions. Also under ITIS, I think that is a major issue. I don't know if you came across during your assessment, where this cross-cutting, where climate change issues are integrated. I wanted to know, did you come across, maybe as Ministry of Works, under the Integrated Transport Infrastructure, where we don't have a standalone projects handling climate change issues?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I sanitize the microphone, I need to mention that the assessment, the compliance assessment report Ronald shared, it will be available online, and ACODE will share it with the available emails you've shared, but also we could, through ACODE again, we could share the link to this report, Ronald. So it's available in case you want to share it with the colleagues. Here you go, here, you want to start here, there, then we come here.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Dennis Asimwe from Global Green Growth Institute. Thank you, Mr. Kagwa, for sharing with us the results of your assessment. I am, of course, interested in the first recommendation, which relates to climate change budget tagging. Just for maybe our appreciation, how ready are we as a country for climate finance? In other words, do we have a strategy for climate financing to be able to then tag or track climate finance that could have been made available in various forms?
Very well said. Sanitize, please, before we pass it on.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Dr. Sarah Kelly from Makerere University. I have some comments and some questions to raise. I start with the results assessment. I want to thank you, Kagwa, but from academia we want a complete story. In your assessment table, you left out manufacturing and human capital development in the first 2020-2021. What happened? Is it that there was no information? How shall we know it has moved to that level? Secondly, I also want to know, what does the assessment results for improved performance mean in line with climate change? How shall we know that things have changed from your assessment? What will show that things have improved after this has been included into the framework? I also want to thank Bob Kazungu for raising the issue of tree planting. Tree planting and awareness is just the starting point in addressing issues of climate change. Climate change issues must be looked at as from different points and from different angles. It's a multi-pronged approach that we need to use. So on this regard, I would emphasize that entities that are encouraging tree planting like NFA, the Ministry of Water, should be supported. They should be well facilitated. They should go ahead and do what they're doing, and then we add some of these issues that will help us address the climate change. I also want to thank the gentleman who talked about the early warning systems. The issues of the early warning systems is about accuracy of information. Most farmers in Uganda don't even believe that the information, the projections that are made will actually work. Because most times those projections are in the other direction. So that department should look at how accurate people can believe their information. I also want to thank the UNDP NDC project. Gloria is there. You people have looked at issues of climate change from the root, from the grassroots. And I would expect us to look at issues of climate change being addressed locally, individually, with effects embraced globally. Because when we look at the grassroots community that have initiated raising of seedlings, addressing issues of climate change through awareness creation, among others, that is when climate change issues will globally be embraced. I also want to emphasize that we have members of parliament here. I would encourage you that the tree fund has not yet been operationalized at the floor of parliament. I think this is an opportunity for the 11th parliament to move this forward so that if the government is able to put in some money to support the MFA, Ministry of Water and other entities that are fronting for restoration in different areas, that would be important. I also emphasize that whereas we are looking at tree planting or tree growing, we need to keep protecting those areas. It's very sad to see forest land still going to individuals. It's very embarrassing. And I would think that government should waive off tax on very appreciative sources of energy like solar. Let every household in the country afford solar. That is when we shall be serious on what we are talking about climate change. What of tariffs on power? If each household is not charged highly, then we shall not cut the trees. We are aware that climate change issues are as a result of deforestation. If we are really committed as government into this fight of climate change, let's lower those power tariffs so that we are able to cook with electricity, we are able to generate solar power, and then we are able to use biogas in addressing issues of climate change. These workshops, these travels, these complaints won't help us unless we address these real issues of climate change. Looking at these plastic bottles, why can't we have a way of recycling them? Why don't we, the youth are idle, they are moving up and down. Let's tell them to collect and repay them. Before you know it, all these plastic bottles will be brought in one point and they will be disposed of. We need to motivate them so that idleness is limited and then they participate in addressing issues of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like the passion here. And then I'll come. You're going to miss your own lunch, eh? So I'm being careful to manage our lunch time. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Paul Yaramsamari from National Forest Authority. Of course, I appreciate the recommendations, but I think, to me, I think National Planning Authority should do more in terms of interacting with the planners of the different ministries and departments to ensure that they balance between interventions for climate change and that real mandate. Of course, I know you belittle the tree planting and so on and so forth, but also you must know that some of these budgets actually are already set for 3 years, you can't change, and so you're going to put money here and there. So who ensures that Ministry of Finance can be able to be flexible to make sure that we make these interventions? Then also you didn't talk about research, because all these interventions must be informed by research, innovation, and also technology, and here they're really very expensive. Of course, you talked of the US, Germany, and so many people dying. But also actually, they're almost like helpless. For example, those structures which are underground and it flooded, how will they build embankments around there? All those are costs which should be informed by research. So I think, Mr. Kagwa, you need to come to NFA and interact more and probably see how to balance, to do things that can be, which are calling real interventions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll go to Claire there, and then Onesimus, I am coming to you, sir. I hope you have my feedback. Onesimus? And on the issue of private sector support to climate change, yes.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Okonzi Atoma Judith. I'm a natural resource specialist with CARE. Mine is just more like inquiring. I would like to know when at a national level or at budgeting, where do the private sectors fall? These people who manufacture these products, what are their contribution towards financing climate change? I assume companies like Coca-Cola, Rwenzori Water, and so on, they produce, and there's a lot of bottles and so on littered out there. How much is their contribution in terms of financing climate change? Are we really able to track their carbon footprints to be able to know how much they are releasing out there, so that they take their share of the burden? We can say, let's mobilize youth to collect bottles, but who is going to support buying of these bottles? I think at this point, if a government was able to structure a way that a company which is releasing so much bottles out there should also own the share of the removal of these bottles from the community. That way, we shall have limited number of bottles if they can, because I see organizations like CARE going out there to see recycling processes. What is the impact of these companies, private sector and so on, in removing what they put out there, polythene, for example. So to me, I would like to know what the government is doing. When they come with the environmental impact assessment, what do they do? Do they go too much into discovering how much carbon footprint is tracking it for those companies? Thank you so much.
I am aware, and as we sanitize the mic to Onesimus, I am aware that the ministry, if Dr. Callisto was here, he'd have mentioned, I know that during the last Environment Week, there was an initiative launched by, I think, one of the partners, development partners, with the private sector on climate change interventions and the role of the private sector in supporting the climate change interventions, including the role of these bottling companies in recycling most of their products after the usage. It's a conversation I know the civil society is following, and I think Onesimus may say something about it. Onesimus, as you prepare for this, there was a comment from Emma. Now that the Climate Change Act is in place, how are we ensuring that the budget allocations in NDP III, sectoral planning, program-based budgeting are tracked in different sectors of the country? This is one way I think we are to be resilient with climate change and its impacts. Ronald, that's again feedback. There was the comment on translation into budgets and inclusion of indicators of PBS in synchrony with the NDP III programs that will do a whole lot of good. Then somebody, of course, asked about PBS, but he meant trying to put the budget at the local government level and including indicators in the program budget system. I think that was it. Okay, so these were online comments from our participants on Zoom. Please don't say we ignored you. We did pick your comments. Onesimus?
Thank you, moderator, and colleagues who have made the presentation and the contribution that have been made so far. Moderator, you gave me so many questions. I need to do a presentation, so I'm not going to answer all your questions. I'll try just to respond to a few, but allow me to start with appreciating the sectors that were assessed and are represented here today. Because this is not the first assessment, we've supported previous assessments, but the participation of the sectors that were even assessed at that time was very, very limited. So to me, the fact that actually we've seen an improvement, but we've also seen in terms of performance, but we've also seen an improvement in terms of participation, appreciation and contribution means that there is something being done. And I want to encourage NPA and other actors to move on, because what we did was trying to do the dissemination when the first assessment was done. Right from the Ministry of Finance, where we wrote memos and complained about a number of things, but also wrote to the PSCs and the accounting officers raising some of the issues. So I'm happy that we see this response, and I think as you talked about awareness, that's how it begins. Kagwa knows very well that I think the two sectors that were represented at the dissemination of the first assessment, the key issue was, can you help us to understand what you mean when you say we integrate climate change? And I think that question has come up again today, so that is an area of emphasis. How do we continue to enhance capacities for these sectors to appreciate what does it mean actually to integrate climate change issues in these programs? And I think someone has mentioned resources, that we must work within the available resources. I think when we talked about the issue of coordination, I think the ED talked about the issue of coordination early in the morning. That is very, very, very important in terms of utilizing the little resources. And I will just give a very simple example of, putting up a school building or putting up a call for a tender to construct a building, and it is a school building, a classroom building. But you forget that probably you could be climate change compliant by also including that building must have a water harvesting facility. You must also have 5 trees as windbreaks. You're already integrating some of these issues, but you are using the same money that is supposed to be to do a classroom. So instead of doing maybe 5 classrooms, you'd rather do 4, but make sure that actually you integrate some of those aspects. And slowly, we can see that is happening. So I'm impressed. But to add on that, we've been in many places. I'll give you an example of West Nile, where there is West Nile West Nile Development Association, where you have 11 districts that come together to discuss issues of development in the area. And we were able to work with them and create a forum within Wenda, which is Climate Resilience and Natural Resources and Climate Resilience Forum. And what it does is to look at climate resilient issues and interventions and be able to update at an annual basis the Wenda General Assembly. That is part of awareness creation in that area. But in the local government assessment, we are also now building the capacities of these, we call them statutory committees, to appreciate their roles and the kinds of things that they can do in terms of these interventions. So there is some level of awareness that we are doing, but of course, it's an enormous task. And of course, there are other many actors that are involved in this. The last 2, I just wanted to, we talked about private sector, and I think, I hope Kagwa could comment on what happened to economic incentives and economic disincentives. Because if you want private sector to participate in this, and she's mentioned it, and other many people have mentioned this, if you want to have these bottles collected, then you need to look at those economic incentives or those economic disincentives that are going to discourage people from doing certain things or to encourage them to do certain things. And I know Kagwa can comment seriously on that and the progress that actually we are making in that area of economic incentives and disincentives. The last comment I want to make is the aspect of gender. While we are making this progress of doing the assessment in terms of climate change interventions or climate resilience interventions, or how programs are integrating climate issues, climate change issues, we need also to start assessing how these climate resilient interventions are gender sensitive. That is one of the aspects. And I don't know whether the Minister of Gender is doing something in that area, or whether you don't think that that is something you may need to start looking at. How are these interventions gender sensitive? And then we start to see and assess as we move along and see whether we can pick some good lessons. So that is something that gender could take on, and I think there are many actors here who would be willing probably to support some of those assessments. And I know now we have the parish model. Everybody is talking about the parish model, and those who are experts in gender and are experts in climate change. I have not seen comments coming from various actors looking at how that model is climate resilient. How is it compliant? Maybe Kagwa should also be assessing that and tell us actually whether it is compliant. Gender should be looking at that and telling us, is it actually gender sensitive? And right. I think by doing that, then we could make progress, because I can see there are some resources now moving at that level, and we need to do something in that respect.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Onesimus. Sanitize that microphone. In 30 seconds, do you bring it here? As we do that, Honorable Francis, I'll come to you. Honorable Hillary, in case you let me know, I'm happy to give you a minute. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Raymond Kyunji is my name, from the Department of Disaster Preparedness in OPM. I'm normally the last person to speak because I'm the person that you want to avoid, really. Anyway, Onesmus tickled me. I had written a question on PMA and how definitely it's going to be handled under this. But since he mentioned it, I thought let me complete the whole question since I had one noted here. So look at PMA and other social protection measures. I know I have my colleague from gender behind, but also we have these likes of EMIOGA. How well are these ones integrating climate change issues? Because we know that the activities they actually implement have an effect, have an impact on the environment. Because if you've seen some of the reports going backwards, YLP and all these other programs, you'll see carpenters and the likes, but what has been, how well? And then remember, they absorb actually government money, part of the budget. So I don't know whether this was factored in. Of course, I really sympathize with Mr. Kagwa because some of the questions that have been asked, I think they go beyond the scope, but I thought that one is important for me to bring out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I know that NPA, where they sit, they assess a lot of content, and EMIOGA falls under some of the interventions in Ministry of Finance on poverty alleviation. But I'm aware there are some components of EMIOGA that speak to areas of climate change, but I don't know if he has the detail. I was told about 1 or 2 yesterday. I just can't seem to remember. All right, Honorable Hillary, yes, and then we come to Honorable Francis.
Thank you very much, MC. Permit me also to thank the organizers for this workshop. In a special way, I want to thank my honorable colleague, Honorable Christine. She actually dragged me to here because I've been disturbing her with climate-related questions, and she was like, this time you come to this workshop, you get the insights of it all. Thank you very much, Honorable Christine. As a member of Parliament, I think we need to pledge our support to whatever has to come and flow in relation to climate change. We are in support to see that we realize a better climate environment. But I need to say a few things, especially since we have people from NFA. I come from Maokota. Maokota is surrounded by many forests. When we were growing, we used to enjoy these natural forests. But shockingly, a few years back, all these forests were put down, care of individuals. And we were told they were leased out to individuals, the natural forests. What makes it worse is that these forests, despite being leased out to individuals, they cut down the trees and they haven't replanted. So the effects of this is affecting our people. Even as we talk about firewood, people can't get it. Yet they were used to naturally go to the forests, pick firewood, and prepare their food. Even when they get hoes, now people have to go to the effects of climate. Now, even when they get hoes, they have to go to hardwares to buy sticks to prepare their hoes. So this is how challenging some things go. I think it is our responsibility to do a lot of sensitization. When we talk about climatic change, the minds run to vegetation, planting trees, and wetlands. When Ronald was presenting, he was like, it isn't all about planting trees. So we would love to know, what are the basics, when I go back to Maokota, what are these basics that I have to instill into my locals to see that environment is protected? the corporate responsibility, one of the colleagues talked about it. I think it is our responsibility again to have these companies incorporated into this move. The companies that produce beverages, we need to put them in line. They should not just produce. We need to see how we tap on their finances, to see how they improve environment. I beg to submit, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable. And we'll sanitize. Let me give the Honorable Francis this mic. I'll sanitize it myself, and I'll take that one after that.
Thank you, Maurice. Like they've told you, my name is Katabaz Francis Katongole, MP Kalungu East. I'd like to thank the organizers and my colleague and friend, Christine Kaya, for inviting me. I will not use the same words like Hillary, that she dragged us, but she really insisted that we should attend. And then later, of course, everyone knows our future is so much dependent on where we stay and all the surroundings we have. Something to do with the climate change is supposed to be a role for everyone without discriminating, because we are preparing where our children will be, our grandchildren will be, and that makes it very important. Of course, it's absurd that some people only think of today. You cut a tree that has been there for 1,000 years. I don't know where you get the guts of doing that. And then when do you expect it to grow again? As a social entrepreneur, I see always opportunity in problems or challenges. Some people have talked about plastic bottles. I would like to advise the experts here to think it business-wise. You know, I always use the pull approach. I attract somebody, not push them to do something. I know very well plastic bottles mixed with the sand make very good tiles and pavers. So when you know that there is a business that will help, I don't know, I think that is environmentally friendly to have that in your house. There are people who make very nice pavers. Actually, those pavers don't even break. There is a lady in Kenya who makes them. She makes from plastic bottles mixed with sand. So I think that would be a good idea for the experts to think about. Then you will not struggle with who to collect the bottles, because they will have use. The way God created us to coexist, we should use it. Because, for example, the plants give out oxygen, and animals, including ourselves, we give out carbon dioxide. But we take in oxygen from the plants, and the plants take in carbon dioxide from us. So that natural or God-created environment should be maintained, and I think we shall have a better environment. I think Madam Akelo, they talked about tree fund. I pledge to support that, together, of course, with guidance from Christine, because she knows better how we can do it. I'll only try to, as a marketer, I'll try to entice others to support it when we're in the House or other colleagues in Parliament, so that we support the tree fund, so that we can save our environment. The power tariffs, still that we can do something about it. And finally, I would also advise the experts to use, like, for example, garbage to make briquettes. You know, if that is sensitized among the locals, they'll stop cutting the trees. Me, I'm looking at how you get a solution from a problem, because I know every problem has a solution the other side. When you, in fact, business is about problems. This world would have been a big problem without problems. Because every problem you solve, you make money. Even when people die, coffin sellers are happy. So you'd wonder, what do they pray when they go to church? They are saying, God, I don't want to finish the prayer, but you know. So let us use the problems, let us create solutions to the problems, and to benefit our people, to improve their livelihoods. So generally, I'm going to be part of, I will, of course, with guidance from Christine and others, any bill that will come on the floor, we shall support it, so long as it's involving climate change. Because this is about our future and the future of our children and the future of our great-grandchildren. So we shall ensure that the sector budgets have provisions for climate change actions, conduct sensitization of the effects of climate change to the economy of Uganda, inform the electorate about the recently ascended bill on climate change, and pledge always to observe the balancing between development and environmental management. I also pledge to encourage the operationalization of the District Climate Change Advisory Committee in my constituency. I beg to submit. I thank everyone, and may God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Honorable. As I switch on the mic, I wanted to mention that our lunch is ready. So Ronald, you are keeping us away from lunch, so you may be mindful that the level of attention might not be as good as we had before your presentation. So please come and make some quick reactions to this. If it is done you can do it from there, okay. In 5 minutes, I am happy we can sanitize your microphone. Okay, here you go. And then we shall ask the Honorable Christine to close our meeting and ensure that by 1 p.m. we are eating our food. So Ronald, you have 5 minutes, and the Honorable Christine told me she only wants 2 minutes. Don't worry.
Thank you very much, Maurice. And I want to thank you very much for the questions raised. There are quite many. And some of them have actually been giving answers to what I said. Now, Dr. Kalisto is not here. I wanted to know what a climate change intervention is. Yes, one, you need to know, how does climate change affect your program outcomes? That should inform your adaptation intervention. That should inform your mitigation intervention. How does climate change affect your outcome? 1.6% of GDP, where are we? We are very far. We're not yet here. We are yet to compute. But what I know is that it is very, very low. Budget tagging, I think that will tell us what activities allocate money to budgets, and that should make the follow-up very, very easy. So whoever has a say, let us fast-track budget tagging. Yes, the senior lady from Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, Mwanga. Yes, we want to unpacking climate change intervention. That is very true. We need to understand what constitutes a climate change intervention. We need to, understand them. Where does UBOS come in and others? UBOS should be able to come in to shape our indicators. I think on the next level of assessment, we may invite you both to participate. Awareness creation, the cultural leaders, they are doing very well. Cultural leaders may not work very well on budgeting, but they're very useful in mobilizing communities to, to support environmental issues. Leaders, in human capital development, we are aware that there is education, there is health, there is gender as well. So our assessment covered all of them to come out with that marks. Yes, you may be wondering why we did not cover you in the other year. My colleagues know the marks were so low, like you have mentioned. The linkage between climate change and health is well known, but your budget does not know it. Your marks were too low that we don't want to embarrass you by putting very low marks there. But no, I mean for the first assessment. I'll get permission from ACODE to do that, but that's what we thought. So surely you need to do, I know you have so many challenges on climate change, on health, so many priorities. You need to understand the linkage between climate change and good health, and this should inform your budgeting as well. Yes, Emma, I think you were emphasizing the issue of early warning and systems and the need for preparedness, and the need also to have a direct budget that talks to early warning, that looks at early warning systems. Yes, Mr. Mujuni from UNIMA, what constitutes climate change? Yes, the science of climate change, the logical sequencing that you talked about, but I think what we are here looking at, what constitutes a climate change intervention? Yes, an intervention that is climate change certainly should address the science of climate change and other areas. Dr. Kabanji, you need to, ignite this debate in the Ministry of Health, the debate on climate change. If you want us to support you in igniting this debate, please call a meeting of this kind, and we shall be very happy to make a presentation in that ministry and show the nexus between health and climate change. What is, I think the parliamentarians have not answered the question, maybe Christine will. What is the level of appreciation of climate change by our leaders? I want to leave that question to Christine, who interacts with the leaders. I interact with the technical people, unfortunately, so I may not answer this one. Yes, the issues of coordination. Coordination is still a very big challenge, and my brother here from OPM, I don't know whether he said it, but it is an issue. Coordination of different players is critical, but I think Boaz is the best position to answer this. Bob Kazungu, our apologies for seemingly to underplay the importance of planting trees. I think no harm intended, but the idea is we need a broader view of climate change intervention, of course including trees, planting, but also to touch other critical areas, such that we have a wider and holistic approach to climate change. Of course, tree planting is a low-hanging fruit, which we need to harness. That is not disputed. John from UNDP, I think your ideas of return on investment in climate change is spot on. And through you, I want to ask UNDP to earmark funds to carry out such a study. It will be a super study. If we invest in climate change, what are the returns? If we invest in environment, what are the returns? If we invest in biodiversity, what are the returns? That study is not there. So we welcome partnership with you. I can come out with the terms of reference and concept notes, and then we move this to the next level. Yes? So investment from the private sector, through the private sector is a critical player that we normally leave out. This study left out the private sector, unfortunately. Again, John, that's another area we can study. What's the contribution of private sector to climate change? What amount of resources do they invest in climate change? How do we maximize private sector intervention in climate change? And in line with the Onesimus' question, we need incentives and disincentives. Because private sector, unlike a UNDP and the government, is moved by profits. They're not working for God and my country. They are looking at, profits. Meaning that we need to create an enabling environment in terms of tax waivers, subsidies, those economic instruments, which motivate the private sector to come on board. Again, that is a critical area where NEMA and other institutions need to see how do we bring the private sector to make environment business like the Honorable is mentioning here. It's only by making environment and climate change a business that we can attract private sector resources in this. And that requires enabling policies, enabling instruments, and financial offers, credit facilities if the private sector is to come on board. Gloria, we are looking forward to this Climate for Development facility. Many opportunities are there. I think it's a critical vehicle for financing climate change, and I think that we should have come yesterday. I do agree with you that we need innovative financing mechanism beyond the government budget. And we need a paper, ACODE. What are the innovative financing mechanisms? We need to write a paper, a research again on this, and how feasible are these innovative financing mechanisms. We need them. Julius from Lemba, you do agree that the cities, our focus, there is a convergence of minds here, a convergence of results, especially as regards the new cities, the issues they are facing. We are happy that we seem to be talking the same language on this. How do we position new cities to meet climate change? How do we make a new cities green planned cities, inclusive cities, holistic cities, cities that are livable? This is what we need, and I know that ACODE has got a program on new cities which addresses this. I think, again, Julius, let's work together with you and ACODE to see that we green the new cities. Boazi, yes, thanks for coordinating the implementation, financing. Yes, you feel that we are looking at not the broader picture of financing, but how the little resources are being used. Unfortunately, this study looked at the government budget. We not look at other sources of funding, the private sector funding, the civil society. I know civil society has a lot of money. Onesimus, I think that is true. But this money is outside our assessment. I think we need to see how much money does civil society get for environment and climate change issues, such that we have got a bigger picture. I know they don't want to talk about it, but this is an area which we also need to see. How do we tap into the private sector resources? ACODE, I don't know whether you can do a paper on yourself, how civil society can be put in the whole financing mechanism of climate change. How civil society, private sector, the non-state sectors basically. climate change. There are so many solar people dealing with solar, private sector dealing with solar products. If you went to a market today, these weekly markets, you'll find solar panels being sold in local shops, even deep in the villages. Solar, lamps being sold. That's private sector involvement. I think we need to document what level of solar, the involvement of the private sector has been. The parish model is based on 7 pillars. And one of the key elements of this pillar, environment and natural resource, is mentioned. You cannot develop the parishes without harnessing the resources they have. What we need to see is how would we go to the parish. The government ministry is represented here. How does Minister of Energy, what does it do at the parish level? Minister of Health, what do you do at the parish level? ICT, what do you do at the parish level? I think we need to study this and see what are our entry points at the parish level. Raymond, climate change integration in Emyoga, I think he gave some insights on this, which are not. Honorable from Maukata, he has gone. I think that was very fine. I think the innovative financing, waste to wealth initiatives that you talked about are very, very welcome. I thank you, Maurice and colleagues, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ronald, let me sanitize your hands so that you don't carry our germs. I can tell you this, hand washing and sanitizing has helped our hospitals. The numbers in the hospitals are very low. And I think we will have to continue with this, even after COVID. Honorable Christine, it's my humble pleasure to invite you. I sanitized the microphone. I even sanitized the environment. As you come to give us closing remarks, but also we want to appreciate the mobilization you're already doing by even inviting your colleagues to come and be part of this conversation. Please, a round of applause. This is just the beginning. We know that you're doing much more, and we thank you very much. Over to you, madam.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I have enough space.
Yes, we are very far from you.
Thank you so much, ACODE, Care International in Uganda, and all other financiers of this engagement. I take this opportunity to thank all the people here, but as well as the people who join us online via Zoom. I take this opportunity as well to thank the members of Parliament who joined us here. It is not easy, the timing is serious, committee meetings everywhere. And I thank you for putting this responsibility in front of me for closing. I will not take long, but I'm Christine Kayana Chimoero, Chivoga District 1 MP. Every time we introduce ourselves, people are like, that one is from where? But before you tell somebody where you're from, they ask, that one removed who? So I removed Minister Nankabirwa Ruth. And he removed the Honorable Sempija of Masaka. And the Honorable Hillary removed Honorable Amelia Chambat. It is not by coincidence that it is us who came. I talked to very many. Because when I'm in the corridors of Parliament, they always ask me about very many things And I'm like, whenever I get opportunity, I'll be inviting you to come over. So civil society and our donor agencies, just be ready. My members will be coming. I also take this opportunity to inform you that Honorable Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu entrusted me as the Shadow Cabinet Minister for Water and Environment. So I am privileged to be your Shadow Minister for Water and Environment, but as well I belong to the Parliamentary Committee on Natural Resources and also Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change. We have sessional committees and standing committees, and you must belong to two. And like some of you were relating with me before I became a member of Parliament, I was the coordinator of the Parliamentary Forum on Climate Change, which is a voluntary platform in Parliament. I think God put me there to also get interested in where I am now. But when we were trying to work with the members of Parliament, the 10th Parliament then, it was not easy to jump over members of Parliament. Yes, many of them have issues in the constituencies related to climate change, but people have different professional backgrounds. People come with different targets. It was not easy orienting members about these issues. And I told my God that, God, take me there such that I become an activist of climate change in the August House. And I see my vision has come to pass. So in addition to other very many businesses of Parliament, I take natural resources management, climate change on the top of the agenda. And many MPs now know me for that. Even Robert Chagulanyi used to see me over that. That is why he interested me in that other capacity. So, thank you very much for the assessment. Usually, very many members of civil society organizations have been asking me, so now, Christine, you are there. How can we help you? And I always told them that we need reports. We need analysis of status of natural resources, of levels of degradation, of very many things, of emissions in the atmosphere, of the pollution in the cities. Those are the status reports that we need, such that when we stand on the floor, we have backing information. At the start of the Parliament, the Speaker informed us that if you don't have data, don't dare stand to say anything. And for us, the data we are looking at, we expect it to come from you. So thank you very much for coming up with this assessment. The information is going to help us so much in presenting the issues, the status quo, and also requesting members to support increments in budgets relating to natural resources management. I am also very happy about the concern on women's land rights and vulnerabilities. These days, the word called youth, or the group called youth, as if it's taking precedence, and men are forgetting women. But when you were youth, you were either female or a male. So I'm not insinuating you to go back to the other debates of the chicken and the egg, which came first. But I'm trying to remind you that even among the vulnerabilities, when you look at the youth, the female youth are still bad off. So the issue of women has to come out. Good enough, I'm a woman member of Parliament. So women are priority still in my work. But I also would like to congratulate you and myself for having had our Climate Change Act assented to by the President without any question. Without any question. Many of you went ahead to consult here and there. You came back to the 10th Parliament, presented issues that were incorporated in the Act, and the Act was accepted by the President. So we are happy about that. And many of you are still referring to it as a bill. It is because we took very many years calling it a bill. And the word bill stuck into our minds. Even when it became an act, some of you are still calling it a bill. So please update your write-ups and the presentations. We have now an act, which act is awaiting formulation of regulations. And then, after the formulation of regulations, there are a lot of things to be done. We need to have a national advisory committee. There is also another advisory committee which is selected based on technical expertise. We have district advisory committees. We have strategic frameworks. We have action plans. All those issues are in there. And the act provided for establishment of certificates of compliance. I hope, Mr. Kagwa, you are aware. So for us in the Climate Change Committee, we shall be looking into your budgets to see if you deserve the certificate. And before you get the certificate, we believe that no money will be according to your votes. So we feel that the act is going to bite somehow in that way. And we shall be there to check whether there is a reasonable budget for climate change. And then we are being provided with status reports of the different ministers and the different MDAs. Some of you have already visited us. I saw Brian there. Office of the Prime Minister, Disaster Management Department came already. Minister of Water and Environment came already. KCCA came already. And I know more are yet to come and meet the Climate Change Committee of Parliament. And we are just registering your status and what you're doing. And today, after here, if you have time, please tune in UBC. UBC, the Minister of Water and Environment, yesterday was giving us a status report on natural resources and environment, but we did not complete, and we are going to complete today when we shall be debating the report. And one of the things I pledged to talk about, I pray that the Shadow Minister will be given some special attention, but one of the items is the establishment of a fund. Remember, NEA, National Environment Act, was proposing for a fund. Yet, the Forest and Tree Planting Act also proposed a fund. The Climate Change Act, when it was a bill, we were proposing for a fund. And the 10th Parliament members were confused. They were saying, now, which fund should we establish? Everybody wants a fund. Who is going to put money in that fund? And the Speaker was like, let's formulate one fund that is probably, we call it a climate fund or environment fund to encompass all those proposed funds. But I think those who first formulated their tree fund don't want theirs to be eroded in those many things. So because of that, no fund has money. Because when you say tree fund, what about the people who intend to manage wastes? What about people who intend to curb pollution in cities? Where will they put the money? But we need a fund, first of all, to attract financiers, as well as direct serious proportions to climate change if negative effects. I don't want to dwell much into this. We shall be linking up in very many arenas. I take this opportunity to declare this workshop closed.
When an honorable speaks, I think the rest of us, homeowners, I even can't go back to the podium. So I will stay away from the podium and only announce that lunch is being served at the restaurant down in the next building. Please note that your numbers have been registered. The reason we had another document running around is that we needed your mobile numbers registered so that the issues of facilitation are addressed by mobile money because of the COVID SOPs. So we want to thank you on behalf of CARE and ACODE for coming to join us this morning and now early afternoon. Please continue being our climate change ambassadors, and good afternoon and bon appetit. Thank you very much.